next guest is here. She is Principal Shelly Anderson. She is a middle school principal in Northwest Washington, D.C. She has spent the past 15 years fighting to ensure that all students have equitable access to a rigorous and engaging curriculum. She I tell you, first of all, is originally from Texas, and I just found out she's only been here a year and a half. So I want to welcome you to Education First and the DMV.
Thank you, Sister Sharon. I'm so excited to be
Absolutely,
here.
absolutely. I love my principals, my principals, as we call them, colleagues. And so I'm really excited. You're a middle school principal. Tell me about your journey to the middle school principalship.
Well, I started as a middle school teacher, and I discovered very quickly that there is something special about anyone who works in middle schools.
Yes.
Um, Something else that I discovered in the research is that it's the middle school level that we quite haven't figured out. We have a lot of elementary schools that are recognized doing well. We have high schools that are recognized doing well, but it seems as if something happens in those middle school years, and that's when we lose a lot of our students that possibly could have had the potential to do great in high school and beyond. So I really became interested in that niche as to what is it that we can do during those years to support those kids to make sure that they make it to the next step.
Wow, I love that because I too was a middle school principal, and you are so right. Our babies leave elementary, some at the top of the game, and then something just happens once they enter middle school.
Yes.
So it is definitely worthy of continued research so we can find out what's going on in the middle. And so I want to talk about. I saw that your school was the only, and I hope I pronounced it right, leveler in
Yes.
Ward 1 in the District of Columbia. First of all, explain what that means.
So the DC Policy Institute did a study about schools that are actually changing or closing the achievement gap for at-risk students. And very few secondary schools made the list. Even
Wow.
fewer middle schools made the list.
Wow.
And so we were identified as the only Ward 1 middle school on the list. And the reason why that's important is because students have to travel very far to access a middle school education where they actually have a chance to not have their demography impact their destiny.
Wow.
And it was just very powerful to read that we have been identified as a campus where your demography does not impact your destiny. You come to us and your outcomes actually improve
Oh, wow.
above what anyone could have imagined for you.
I love it. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's definitely amazing because we know, first of all, that it's so many variables to our student achievement, what we're trying to reach for our students. One of important part of that is community engagement, community involvement. How do you get your parents and your community involved in the success of your school?
Well, one of the things that we've tried to do is just bring a positive climate and culture to the school to get the kids excited about the school. And when kids start to get excited, then parents see it's not business as usual. Because when kids are excited, they tell their parents, make sure you come out for this, make sure you come out for that. And that has really been what we've done to get the community, to get the parents involved, and to actually get the kids excited. Like, wait a second, this is something different.
I love it. I love it. One of the things that I tell my aspiring principals always is how communication is so pivotal in getting things done. For example, telling our own narrative, because we know in mainstream media, we don't always, public schools, get positive press. Um, it may be some, but a lot of times, as soon as something negative happens, that's when the press is there. How do you communicate and get that positive narrative about your school?
Well, one of the things that we like to do is just open ourselves up. We have open houses. We publish newsletters. We like to invite the community in to see who we are. We also like to give our students opportunities to go out into the community to do some work so they can see who our kids are. But part of it is making sure that we, as you said, dominate the narrative, that we know who we are and that we're able to get that story out.
Yes.
Because if not, it's this idea of urban schools are this, urban schools are that, these kids are such and so, without really understanding the backgrounds that they come from.
I love it. And so, how do students get to your school? Is it an application process? Like, how do they get to become a student?
Well, they enroll in the DC process, where
Okay.
it's a lottery process. They can apply as well. We are a public charter, so we take students from all income levels, all backgrounds. And once they enroll in our school, we just look at them as just fresh opportunity to do great.
Wow, that's awesome. And of course, our first guest, we had Dr. Denise Boston. She really talked about that diversity piece. And I ended with how important it is for us as school leaders to make sure that we're embracing that diversity and including and being very inclusive. Being in the District of Columbia, there are, I'm sure, diversity that is not necessarily ethnicity or race. How do you embrace diversity within that community?
I think one of the things as educators that we have to talk about is trauma and what trauma looks like for students and what that means as far as the work that we have to do as educators.
Yes.
We know that across all populations, students have experienced adverse childhood experiences. Short ACEs is what they call it. But in communities of poverty, especially minority communities of poverty, we see this to an exponential extent. When you compound the fact that our communities are the least likely to have access to health care, it means that we have students who come in who are not necessarily receiving any type of therapeutic follow-up or even just normal checkup. Now, how this connects to diversity is because it's not just business as usual. It's not just because I look like you,
Right.
I know how to communicate to you. I actually have to educate myself about what research says about the trauma that happens to early childhood and how it impacts the brain. And this becomes essential to making sure that my educators, regardless of race or background, are able to actually be effective in communicating with our students.
I love it. I love it. So what do you see for yourself? Because you are most recent to the principalship. And with that comes challenges. Even as a 7-8 year principal, there are challenges. So I know someone who's entered first and second year, you have faced, those adversities as a school leader. How do you overcome a lot of these challenges that we face? Work-life balance. You have a little son that you adore. We talked about, and I'll ask you to speak on him a little later. But your mom, no doubt you do things in the community. And this work that we do as school leaders is monumental. How do you do it all?
I read a book last year. It's called Dare to Lead by Brene Brown.
Brene Brown, yes.
And she talks a lot about the power of vulnerability and the power of being able to bring your whole self into the work that you do. And that can be difficult because you have parents, you have upper administration, you have teachers who are constantly coming at you with problems,
Yes.
with issues, and it becomes easier sometimes just to put up a shield because you don't want to be impacted. But she talks about staying open and giving of yourself and using your whole heart whenever you work with people and being present. And so that has really been helpful to me because I find that when I show up with my whole heart, whenever I show up in a space and I say, I don't know the answer to this, but I will sit next to you and try to find it, that's when I'm the most effective.
I love that. Oh my goodness. And let's talk about your dear son and I thought it was so endearing when you sent your picture and had it. I said, wow, that's love. That's it. And you want to include him in everything. And I love that. Talk about that relationship.
So my son Trey was born on Valentine's morning in 2014.
Wow.
And from the moment we met each other, we just knew instantly that it was a love affair. He is extremely bright, extremely smart. He's probably watching as I speak. And this year he started kindergarten and was just recently diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And so it's been a really odd thing for me to navigate being an educator
Yes.
and now having my son in the education system. And one of the things that I found is how disappointing it is.
Wow.
How the education system treats our children who might be just a little bit differently, or treats our boys of color. I know this, you know this, we